What's going on, YouTube? Foresight here. We're going to take a look at Palantir's price action over the past month and a half or so and talk about some key pricing levels for the very short term. We're talking 1 to 2 trading weeks out. I just made a video recapping the past year of Palantir's price action and giving some longer term projections, and a lot of you had reached out and said, hey, what about the shorter term? I'm looking to potentially enter Palantir now, so we're going to take a look at some key price levels in the areas that I would ultimately be comfortable adding to my position. Also, towards the end of the video, we're going to take a look at a Seeking Alpha article, which is talking about selling puts on Palantir, collecting some nice upfront premium and taking some of the risk off while also locking in being able to buy Palantir at a substantial discount. This is something that I've done many times before on Palantir. It hasn't worked out in my favor, but I'm going to show you just how you can lock in buying Palantir as low as $5 per share over the next month. So we're going to take a look at the recent price action here. We've seen a relatively wide range for Palantir over the past month. However, in comparison to the market, it's ultimately performing very well. So Palantir led the charge down, falling a lot faster than the overall market heading into Q1 earnings. However, after earnings, which a lot of people looked at as a relatively weak earnings for Palantir, we've actually seen a bit of a bounce back, taking over the $7.50 per share range, which we've used as support multiple times as recently as Thursday or Friday of last week, and then trading below $9.25, which has acted as resistance multiple times as recently as the beginning week of June and also the second week of June. So we're now trading roughly in the middle of that overall channel at right around $8.21. If you take a look at where we're wedged right now, we're wedged between the 50 and 200 period moving average, with the 200 period moving average being a big indicator, if we can retake that potentially we can start pushing back towards this $9.25 and maybe even $10 per share range. But as of right now, we haven't been able to trade above the 200 period moving average for a couple of weeks now. Now, we are seeing a slight curl up in the 50 period moving average, and currently the index futures are trading up. So we had the long weekend. They opened up on Monday evening with the Dow Jones up over 300 points, and the NASDAQ was also up, indicating to me that potentially the market could open up. So if it were me, I'm not buying Palantir pre-market on Tuesday. I ultimately want to see which way the stock is going to dash. If it's going to follow the overall market and gap up, we could see an overtake of the 200 period moving average, but it could also just as easily get rejected by this 200 period moving average and start a new trend back towards 750. Now, I mentioned in my video just a few days ago that the market is relatively weak right now. Stocks are looking for almost any reason to sell off. Even good news has tended to be bad news, and bad news has tended to be detrimental for stocks recently, especially on profitable stocks like Palantir. So we're seeing the NASDAQ getting hit the hardest when we see these overall down days. So overall, I'm waiting for Tuesday, potentially even Wednesday, to see which way the stock is trading. A big area that I'm not interested at all in buying Palantir in is in the middle of this range, though. If we see an overtake of the 200 period moving average, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, I'm not necessarily buying at that point because I want to see if we can get some momentum and break above 950. I'm willing to actually lose a bit of money that I could have otherwise made by buying at the break above the 200 period moving average to see if we can break above this level or if we're just going to get rejected, because I don't want to lock up my money for a long period of time. So really anything in this range, I'm not particularly interested in buying. I want to actually see a break above this 200 period moving average and above the previous resistance levels of 925 before even thinking about continuing to add to the position at these high levels. Now, if we get rejected by the 200 period moving average and start moving down towards this $7.50 per share support level, this is where I'm very interested in buying. So this zone here that I'm not interested in buying is kind of like a no man's land where there's not really a clear direction of the stock overall, and so I don't want to lock up my money not knowing which way the stock is likely to go in the short term. However, if we start to enter this level at the 750 or even see a break below this level, that's when I would start to add into my Palantir position again in the short term, even if we're still trading below these moving averages, because it represents enough of a discount to go ahead and add to the position and start to wait for the momentum to build back up in Palantir. So overall, I'm really looking to buy in this 750 area. But again, if we break below that level, I'm not looking to buy in this space between 750 and all the way down to $7, where we saw it act as support a few times before. Now, we had that brief break for a few hour trading candles after the earnings report before the big jump back up, but I would say overall 7 is a very solid support level for Palantir. So I would potentially look, let's say that I've got $1,000 that I want to allocate towards Palantir, at adding maybe 300 of the dollars here, 330, so maybe a third of the overall dollars that I would want to allocate towards Palantir, and potentially waiting for a breakdown to see if we're going to touch that $7 per share mark again before ultimately taking off. We're starting to see higher lows, a double bottom over here after a higher low after the low that we saw back at the beginning of May. So building up a bit of momentum, but overall, again, the market is just not continued or not done selling off, as I've mentioned in the past. So I'm really looking for those key levels to be able to add to Palantir in the short term. 750, I'm adding maybe a third of my position and then plowing into the extra 2/3 at around 7. Now, some of you may say, hey, that's not wide enough of a gap for me to ultimately wait on 2/3 of the position just to save the extra 70 cents, which is fair enough. And if that's the case, then maybe you just add your full position at 750 and just be willing to take that little bit of extra downside risk. But that's kind of the key level that I'm looking for to add. Or again, if we break above the 200 period moving average and then break above 930, I might be willing to add there as well. Yeah, I'd be missing out on roughly $1 per share, but overall, as I've mentioned in the past, I think this is at least a $14 to $18 stock. In the not so distant future, if the market turns around a bit, I could see it being there as recently as 1 to 1.5 years out. So buying at, $8.30 or $9.25, not a huge difference overall in the terms of percentage returns. So that's what I'm looking for ultimately right now. It's not really adding in this dead area that we're in, but looking for a nice return back to the support that we've seen the double bottom at before, or a break above the 925 that we've been rejected by. And I want to go ahead and pull up here the Palantir stock at $9 or $5 per share article that was written just today and dropped on Seeking Alpha. Now, this is something that I've talked about in the past before on this channel, and I've done it actually in the past with Palantir, is selling puts. Now, when you sell a put, you're essentially selling an obligation to buy a stock at a specified price at a specified time in the future, and for selling that obligation, you actually get paid upfront. It's called premium. You collect it, and it tends to be a certain percentage of the overall stock price. Now, there are a ton of different ways that it's calculated, but if you log into your brokerage account, you'll actually be able to see the immediate upfront premium that you're going to collect. So let's just take a look at the article here real quick. And they mentioned potentially selling puts on Palantir at $5 per share for a September 2022 expiration. They're mentioning potentially putting on a trade for 10 contracts at 21 cents per share, which is the amount they would collect up front. So they would get paid $210 immediately, credited into the cash into their brokerage account, which they could then use to buy additional Palantir shares at the current price, or potentially wait for that dip that we've been talking about to buy shares at a lower price. And that represents something like a 4% return over the next 3 months. So it's interesting to see that Seeking Alpha traders are now coming out and starting to sell puts, because Palantir is really reaching the level where, especially if you're selling $5 puts, that it could be considered a value play. And in fact, the article goes on to mention that at $5, Palantir would be trading at something like 30% cash compared to their market value, which could even make them an interesting buyout potential. Now, I personally don't think that any publicly traded company would come out and actually outright buy Palantir, potentially Google, but I don't think any of the other publicly traded companies would have any interest in owning a company like Palantir, but it still is an interesting value at a roughly 40% discount from current prices, and to be able to be paid 4% for being 3 months out, it's an interesting trade to be put on. So I'm actually going to link this article so you can check it out yourself. This video already ran a bit longer than I was anticipating, but it is a strategy that I've been using, especially as the stock dips. Let's say that it did dip down to the roughly $7 per share range, you could then collect a much nicer premium for selling that $5 put, since it's a bit closer to the money, and that would represent a much higher percentage return. Now, of course, there's a bit more risk because at that point it's trading a lot closer to the strike price, but I find it highly unlikely that Palantir would fall an additional 40% from where it's already fallen over the next 3 months. So that's just some extra additional ways that you could potentially collect some yield on setting some of the cash aside and being ready and able to buy Palantir at a dip, but not yet committing to it or committing to a much lower price than the current market price. So I just wanted to bring that to you. Again, I hope that you stayed around until the end and found value in the price targets that I'm looking at. I'm really looking to get Palantir on a good dip, but if we start to see some momentum, I'll also add to the position even at a higher price. But I want to see us have that momentum and start pushing towards that $10 plus per share range to break into the next level of roughly the $10 to $14 per share price point. So let me know, are you adding on to Palantir this week? Are you waiting for a pullback? Are you waiting for some momentum? Or are you happy with your position where it is? And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I cover Palantir a lot on this channel. I'm trying to throw in some other topics out there, but of course Palantir is one of my biggest holdings, so I'm interested in covering that a lot. But let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see. Thanks for stopping by. Catch you in the next one.